Right. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm sure some folks will keep cycling in. Thanks a lot for joining us today. I'm Daniel Estrada. I'm the CEO at 86 Repairs. Very excited to have you here. Very excited to have Nick Seibel here from Primanti. I'll have Nick do some introductions here in just a moment. But we're excited to dig into this topic, controlling the hidden cost of R&M. It's something that's been top of mind for operators for a long time, but we're seeing an increased focus on it over this past year, and especially now with budget season upon us for the year. Lot of good conversations happening on this topic. So we'll do some quick intros. We'll give you a couple of just overview points on the state of the industry, and we'll start the discussion, get into some media insights. I'm sure that Nick will be able to share with us. As I mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO here at 86. Nick, I'll go ahead and have you introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Nick Seibel. I'm the Director of Construction and Facilities at Primanti Bros.
How long have you been at Primanti, and what led you down that journey? I'm
Yeah.
curious about what you were doing before.
Coming right up on 3 years at Primanti Brothers after 20 years with another Pittsburgh-based chain called Eaton Park Hospitality Group, where I kind of split my time between supply chain and facilities management there.
Great. All right. We've got a couple of high-level insights, couple of interesting data points that I thought would be helpful to sort of frame up the discussion. And I'll let Nick chime in on these as well. Some of you might know that we do a state of repairs report. We do a big report once a year, and then we update some of these metrics throughout the year. And I thought some of the trends that we've been seeing recently were really interesting. When we looked at repairs and maintenance costs year over year, we saw an increase last year of about 18%, and we had exactly the same increase in the first half of 2025. The numbers were like 17.8 and 17.9% increases. So what we're seeing here is that R&M costs are increasing steadily, and they're continuing to increase basically at the same pace. And the reasons for that are fairly simple. There's a shortage of skilled tradespeople in the market. So there aren't enough technicians, whether those are in-house technicians that operators have on their own teams, or whether they're third-party service companies that you're relying on to repair, to service equipment and infrastructure in your restaurants. There's a shortage of those folks. And so we're seeing these costs continue to rise. And that is one of the big challenges here is that operators need to focus on reducing the amount of repairs and maintenance they're doing, managing repairs and maintenance more proactively, because these costs are going to continue to rise. And it's not really possible for us to reduce those per service visit costs. Those hourly rates are going to keep going up. The availability of technicians is going to keep going up. And we're going to see continued decline in response times. So one of the things you'll hear us talk about is what can we do to reduce unnecessary service visits? And I think that's really a focal point for the discussion.
One of the other things we're seeing, Daniel, is on emergencies, which you're going to talk about here shortly. Anytime you have a next day air part, trying to get that OEM part expressed in, we've seen about a 20% increase in those next day fees as well, which were already high, and now they're extraordinarily high. So
yeah, that's really interesting.
The more predictive you can be and be prepared with parts on hand can certainly save you quite a bit.
Yep. Really interesting insight on the kind of transportation fees. Obviously, with tariffs, equipment is getting more expensive, parts are getting more expensive. There's also those kind of macroeconomic factors that are driving up cost. You mentioned emergency is 13% more expensive to handle something as an emergency. A lot of times operators are paying overtime rates for service. They're, like you said, overnighting parts, right? So that's another interesting, important takeaway here, I think, is how do we reduce the number of emergent issues that are happening on the equipment? Another interesting just fact, this hasn't changed much over the years, but the top most frequent service categories are continue to be hot side or cooking equipment, cold side refrigeration equipment, and plumbing issues. So those are the most common that we see across the industry. I'll let Nick chime in here as well, but a couple of high-level metrics I wanted to share on Primanti and some of the work we've been doing together in partnership this year. You can see on this chart the number of tasks. These are individual activities that happen on repairs completed by the Primanti team. And on the right-hand side, the tasks that our system and our customer service team is completed for Primanti. We're looking at roughly 3,000 service requests so far this year. And you can see there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into managing repairs and maintenance. And I think this is something that operators often don't think about. What is the load on the frontline staff? The follow-ups with service companies, the chasing, right, of work that needs to get done, confirming that things were actually fixed, reviewing and approving quotes, all of those kind of approval processes, all of those little tasks, little steps that have to be taken in the process. That's a place where there's quite a bit of hidden cost. So something we'll dig into a little bit more in our discussion, but I thought this was an interesting framing.
Just a note, that's figures across 38 operating sites. So we have 38 restaurants involved in this.
Great context. Thank you. Couple of other metrics here for you just to give you a sense of the scale. I was wrong. It's closer to 4,000 repairs so far this year. So about 3,700 repairs managed since January, about $122,000 in savings from avoiding dispatches, unnecessary dispatches. That's an interesting topic we can get into a little bit more, but how do you do that? How do you avoid not having to send a service company or one of your internal techs in the first place? And then, of course, all those tasks that we were talking about on the previous slide, this all leads to saved time. So our estimate based on the time that our team and the Primanti team is spending managing repairs is just under 4,000 hours that we've been able to save their frontline teams. Nick, any other context that you can give us, maybe just high level on Primanti? You have 38 locations. You're in, I think, 4 states at this point. Tell
Yeah,
us about the operation and some of the challenges that you all are dealing with in R&M.
yeah. So 38 locations. We are in 4 states. We're in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and Maryland. So relatively succinct regions, which we don't have those broad kind of vendor ranges. We really, only use 3 or 4 different plumbing companies, 3 or 4 different HVAC companies, and maybe 2 or 3 refrigeration and hot side vendors. So we're pretty controlled in that realm. I think one of the biggest challenges we have, we're a chain dating back to 1933, which means we have some pretty old buildings. And as the brand kind of expanded, we expanded into open real estate, and we took over some older buildings with the challenges come along with that. In terms of older infrastructure, HVAC, electrical, and like Daniel mentioned, plumbing is a big risk of ours. So that's one of the things we battle. And 86 is helping us kind of tackle some of that, do some internal troubleshooting, and also help manage our PM schedules and some of our compliance needs.
Yep. All makes sense and pretty common at the scale that you're operating at. What does your day-to-day look like? I'm interested, probably other folks on the call are interested. You're running facilities for this organization of stores and all these states. What is the day-to-day in your world?
So my title being director of construction and facilities means I have the day-to-day facilities maintenance, which if you're not careful can consume the whole day. But then I also have the construction role and refreshes and remodels, as well as all of the financial budgeting and forecasting demands that come along with that. So frankly, without 86 repairs, kind of helping tackle that day to day, I wouldn't be able to get all of the other parts of my job done. So kind of the way I balance it, I'm about 30% operation support, which I hope will continue to dwindle as 86 gets more involved. We've been with 86 since January, and the adoption rate has risen every period since then. And then about 30% of my role is vendor and compliance management, making sure that we're in touch with local codes, that we have our vendors. We're having regular business reviews and meetings with our vendors, just to make sure they know we're watching the costs, we're watching the rates. And then 20% refresh and remodel planning and execution. That said, we're really in kind of a refresh remodel mode, not looking at new construction in the next year or so. So We're going to have 5 or 6 remodels next year, so that's really going to increase demands on me there. And then about 20% just working with the finance and accounting team um, with our FP&A demands and budgeting. So,
Got it. That's helpful. What on the vendor side, I know that's something that a lot of folks are interested in. What are some of the biggest challenges that you all have with service companies, just in general, vendor management being a big part of your role?
like you mentioned earlier, technician availability is a huge risk right now, especially when it comes to after-hour support. You just never know who you're going to get when you have a drain backing up. You might have to call 3 or 4 different companies, and I've found myself having to do that. So since switching to 86, we have that customer service team kind of behind us that can do a lot of those follow-ups and escalations, and that's been incredibly helpful. On the other end, we're seeing a lot of consolidation, particularly on the building and life safety management. So your fire suppression companies, just seeing a lot of the big guys kind of buying up all of the smaller vendors that tend to have kind of the lower pricing. So, that's one of the things we're seeing, trying to negotiate those rates back down to something more reasonable than those national rates.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. One of the things we talked about availability of technicians is one of the things that's driving up cost. But the other thing is we're also losing buying power, right, with those smaller companies because as they get bigger, they have more buying power. You have fewer options in the market, so the buying power really decreases, which drives up cost for operators. Tough trend, not something that you can tackle head on again, these macro issues. On that topic, I know several of you participated in the poll. Sydney, if you have some results you could share with us, that would be great. Perfect. Looks like about a third of the group finding good service companies, the topic we were just on, was the top pain point around R&M, followed by understanding performance of those service companies, and then of course cost management, tracking, projecting costs, and following good kind of standard operating processes. So it sounds like the vendor topic is a place where we should spend some of our time today. What kind of speaking about talking about this topic of vendor management, can you talk a little bit about what led to your decision to explore a new repairs and maintenance solution? Were there vendor issues, vendor trends that were part of that decision, or why did you all decide to look for something
Sure.
new? When did you decide to implement something like 86?
Yeah, I started kind of going from an internal facilities help desk where we had 4 or 5 people kind of supporting operations and selecting vendors and dispatching internally. We moved to a CMMS platform, a true kind of automated software as a service solution about 4 or 5 years ago. And we were kind of on the forefront of that. But one of the challenges there is the automated dispatching. And I think in my experience looking at 4 or 5 of these different solutions, um, everything's driven by the asset selection. And one of the challenges we have in both of the organizations that I've worked for is getting the operators to select the correct asset. And so, if they select, say it's a power cord issue on a cooler and they put it in as electrical, it's going to dispatch an electrician. Might not be the best solution for that problem. Might be better to have an equipment vendor come out and go over that piece of equipment and make sure that it's repaired to manufacturer specification. So one of the challenges we had with that, very robust reporting, very good software solutions. It wasn't tailored really to restaurants. And 86 with kind of the customer service team behind the scenes, not touching every work order, but touching major work orders, performing active troubleshooting, really communicating with the store to find out what the problem is, has really kind of bolstered our ability to support operations, to reduce the frustration when the wrong vendor shows up, and ultimately to get that problem fixed and get the restaurant back in operation sooner.
Got it. That's helpful. And did you have any specific, pain points that we were difficult for you to address? Not necessarily just in the R&M solution that you chose, but in general, when we think about cost and managing vendor relationships, are there certain pain points that have continued to be challenging, and that maybe we can focus the conversation on a little bit?
Sure, yeah. It definitely one of the challenges is getting the vendors that you want to use to kind of buy into the solution. And when they have to create an account, log into a platform, potentially even have to pay for that platform in addition to what we as restaurant operators are paying for it. It was hard to kind of get that adoption. Really, the best players in the market were like, well, we'll do it, but we're going to have to charge you for it because it's an additional step on our end. It's an additional software piece that we have to train our folks to accommodate. It's kind of nice that they can just generate, the work orders can be emailed, called in, texted from the 86 Repairs customer service team directly to the service providers. It opens up a much wider range of service providers to where you can even have Joe's Electrical, who really has no technology behind him, but can receive a text message, can go out and can do great work in the field, but then provides a handwritten invoice that would never work with any of the other CMMS providers. But they're
Yep.
able to email that invoice in. And I should clarify too that we are using the invoice solution provided by 86 Repairs. So all of our invoices are going through and being scrubbed by 86 Repairs before they're presented to us for payment.
Mhm. It's a really interesting topic on the kind of vendor engagement. It's something we hear a lot from operators when they start implementing these more streamlined, better processes, when they try to implement software solutions to manage repairs and maintenance. What often happens is those small mom and pop vendors who are doing the best work in local markets, who are the least expensive usually in local markets, will just not work with them, or they'll start increasing their rates, like your experience. And so that's another a place where we're seeing cost pressure up, in the market. So I'm curious about, the kinds of conversations and change management maybe that you had to have with those service companies. Maybe you can talk about that when you implement
Well,
new solutions.
it has certainly helped too when we have regular guests that are our fans that are sitting in our restaurants day after day that happen to be plumbers and electricians that are saying, they're seeing these nationwide companies walk in and they're saying, hey, I could have helped you with that. Well, it
Mm-hmm.
helps to have those conversations to say, well, hey, let's get your information, let's get you set up, and let's try that out. So it really helps us kind of engage our fans um, and our operations leadership too. That says, hey, I know if I put this in, I'm going to get Chucky, who I'm familiar with, I'm comfortable with. He's worked here forever. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a
They're
that's a
not
great
being
thing in the market.
they're not being forced to work with certain service companies just because corporate said this is what we're doing, or because some third party platform decided they wanted to be locked in.
Yep.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I wanted to remind everybody we do have a Q&A open. You should see a button at the bottom of your Zoom window. So feel free to submit questions and we'll tackle those as they come in. And Nick and I have a lot more we can talk about here. We'll start diving into some of those hidden cost areas. That's one of the next things I want to chat about. But please feel free to start submitting your questions, and we'll leave some time at the end for those. Nick, one of the things I wanted to talk about just on the process side, one of the challenges that we often see is changing the way you're working, the way that your frontline teams engage in the R&M process, whether you're using a tool or third-party support from somebody like 86 or not, is that change management is hard, right? Anytime you're trying to introduce process, discipline, tracking data, having insights that help you do something in the organization, like reduce cost, that's change management. It takes a lot of time and energy to do that. So I'm curious, what have you done operationally as you've scaled and improved your processes to drive that buy-in and that change? I mean, those results that we saw in the slides, those are something we did together, right? We needed you to be a good partner in that process. So how did that work with your team, and how have you how would you think about doing that well?
Definitely in-depth introduction. So we were fortunate that we had great buy-in from our multi-unit leaders and from our regional vice presidents that were open to having those conversations and kind of have the training up front, and the more communication you can do before go live, really illustrating the differences from a traditional CMMS to a support-based solution like 86, really helped. So it was easier that we weren't going from just calling in service calls. We were already using a platform, but it was really just communicating how that platform is different. And we started right at that point inviting um, additional service companies kind of back to Primanti Brothers that
Mhm.
might have worked with us since 1970, but haven't worked with us in the last 4 years since we've been on a third party platform. So um, I think really inviting that kind of personal touch back to it really
Mhm.
helped us get the buy-in. Um, and then really kind of the visibility, um, checking the boxes, when a vendor's dispatched, when they're expected to arrive, providing accurate ETAs, kind of building trust in the solution really helps with that change management. There was very little trust in the automation before. So we communicated that, hey, this really is not as there's some parameters, there's some mapping built in, but it's not as automated as before. So that kind of helped us get that operational buy-in as well.
There was some hesitation from your team and sort of decisions software was making and stuff
Yeah,
that they didn't have
yes,
visibility to.
yeah, yeah. And
Got
one
it.
of the other things is just the breadth of ways that you can communicate with 86 repairs. You can do it through the website, through the app. You're welcome to call, you're welcome to text. All of those communications are recorded. The kind of the chain is there. People know that it's backed up that, hey, we did make this call. So
Mhm. Yep. Makes sense. Makes sense. Change management's huge. It's one of the things we always say to customers before they sign on with us is that there's going to be time and energy, needed in the early days to keep reinforcing those messages, like you said, with the operations team, making sure that they get training, of course, but then also that we're reinforcing that training and the behaviors that we want. That really starts with buy-in from senior ops leadership down. Just like any change that's going to help you improve the organization, it has to be consistent and well communicated. All right, I'm going to pepper in a couple of questions here. We've got a couple already, but Nick, David asked, when a non-emergency service call is needed, what time frame do you expect the service call to be completed? Within a week, 2 weeks?
that's a good question. I mean, in the restaurant industry, everything is high priority, right? So I encourage our folks. I actually, when we first rolled out 86 repairs, I found that our folks were not scaling things emergent enough. So they would put things like a cracked booth seat in or something as low or medium. And I said, that's really a guest facing issue. It should be a high priority, not an emergency. We don't need to pay overtime for it, but that really should be a high priority handled within a couple days, probably for a booth, maybe a week the most. Um, I look at lower priority issues like a ceiling tile or something like that might be in the back of the house, might not be guest facing, but could be a potential compliance thing if the health department comes in. I generally hate to see things go over a week. Um, unless it's something that's just going to take longer, like, getting a window made or something like that. But generally, low priority, I would give a week, week and a half, medium priority within a week, high priority a couple of days, and emergency, I try to get fixed the same day, regardless of whether it's a weekend or not. And those are kind of the priority levels that 86 Repairs uses. I think every system kind of, might do an L1, L2 kind of escalation like that. But we usually look at low, medium, high, and emergent.
Yep. Great call out. And I think one of the things too that's interesting on this topic is you mentioned it. Response times are important to drive and have good SLAs around. Our ability to, as operators, to drive those SLAs with service companies is mixed. If you have restaurants in rural areas, the response times are going to be slower. There's not as much availability of service companies. So there's a difference there. And then you all also operate a combination of counter service restaurants and full service, right? So depending on what's kind of guest facing in a given location or a given market, that can drive your urgency level too. Good question. Thanks. Thanks, David. Let's dig into the Actually, we have one more question here that I think is kind of related there on the cost front. Then I think we can dig into some of the hidden cost topics. Just came in from somebody who submitted it anonymously. When seeing a 13% increase on costs between emergency and non-emergency, did that help shift internal buy-in on being more proactive with certain services?
It's a very good question. It definitely does. I mean, it varies by location. Some operators are definitely more cost focused. Um, Especially when you get lower volume where that's a little bit less diluted. But those that are really focused on their bottom line and those that are really focused on their R&M line, that will drive them to reduce priorities. Sometimes even maybe when they shouldn't. We are kind of a fryer centric concept. We've got fries on everything.
Mhm,
I consider if one of our six fryers goes down, that's an emergency because it's going to impact check times. A cost focused manager may opt to go with five fryers for a weekend to avoid that overtime or that emergent rush fee.
mhm,
So that's something to be cognizant about and maybe communicate as well, just kind of which items are most critical, so that isn't deferring service.
mhm. Yeah, that's great. Great point. Thank you. On the topic of cost, what are some of the other things that you consider, hidden costs? The delta between emergency and non-emergencies is a good example, but what are the other things that operators might not be thinking about when we're thinking about managing R&M cost?
One of the things that we're seeing crop up is really excessive trip fees. So we're seeing a lot of vendors kind of add in additional cost for miles, fuel surcharges, things like that. And the problem with those is once they're there, it's very hard to make them go away.
Mhm,
So when you see some of those tariff increases, for example, come into play, once they're there, it's hard to negotiate it. So you really got to catch those when they crop up and say, hey, can we talk about that? Kind of have that discussion with the vendor to try to get those mitigated as much as possible. I mean, they're seeing the cost pressures as well. We understand that, but
mhm,
we've got to understand that partnership is there. So I also think that having those strong vendor partnerships and constant business reviews is helpful to combat that. Weak partnerships are certainly a hidden can result in hidden costs to R&M. We already talked about next day air fees for parts. Um, One of the other things that we see frequently is dispatches for avoidable services. Um, 86 Repairs has kind of helped us with that, with the troubleshooting, making sure we're not rolling a truck to flip a breaker. Um, we're not rolling a truck because somehow the gas got turned off. Kind of further diagnosing those issues before trucks roll. So that was a hidden cost that we would battle constantly.
yep. Makes sense.
There's
Makes
my
sense.
energy management coming into play. There we
That's good.
go.
Running a tight ship over there. That's
Yep.
what we like to see. Speaking of cost,
Yep.
keeping the lights on. Good. One thing I wanted to ask you about, repair versus replace decisions. This is a really this is a really tricky one because, you might be able, it's hard to know how long you can live with a piece of equipment. And so you might, especially a manager who's making this decision, who's incented on the performance of their P&L in that restaurant, right? They may choose to defer maintenance, defer repairs on something. How do you think about that? And how do you think about the cash impact of those decisions, over time?
Yeah, so we definitely, we kind of follow the 50% rule that once you've spent 50% of the value of a new item, say it's an oven, you
Mhm,
really should purchase a new oven. I think the problem we see is those costs sneak up on us. And we hit that 50% before we even realize it.
mhm,
So that constant reporting and reviewing your reporting and your insights that are provided in the software help us tackle that. But again, the vendor relationship, I have our two main hot side and cold side vendors. I say, hey, if you see something that's really kind of getting to the end of its life, the technicians are pretty good at identifying that. I said, make sure you put that on the invoice. And when we go through and we review every invoice, we look for that. And when we start to see, hey, I made this repair, but I really think it should be the last repair, then it allows you to plan for that replacement before that unit's down again.
Mhm.
Because one of the things, in today's cost market, we can't just have coolers sitting around ready to go.
Right.
Um, we have to order as we need them, and you never know, that might be a week lead time, might be a 3 week lead time.
Right.
So we really want to kind of get those decisions made before we're completely down.
Yeah. Before the equipment's totally unusable, and now you're impacting operations.
Yep.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Couple of other questions here I'll go to from our audience. Somebody asked, are you using IoT, Internet of Things, on equipment to predict future malfunctions? Do you have any sensors on your equipment today?
We don't. The only one that we've really gotten involved in with that is the Ecolab. Our Ecolab leased dish machines do
Mhm.
have some intelligence and some reporting. Um, in our brand, we really have not delved into that.
Mhm.
Um, I'm aware of some other brands that have, but that's mainly for kind of recipe management to kind of get the settings programmed in the oven and updated.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that's not something we've found tremendously helpful yet. But one of the things too, most of our cooking equipment is gas. And when you're in gas equipment versus electric, there's not as many electronics that really hasn't crept into that realm just yet.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, it's good. I think that is a pretty common perspective. I'll just add, we have a number of operators who have sensors in some or all of their, actually, it's usually only a subset of the equipment. I think almost always a subset of the equipment. And we integrate with those alerts. We can take actions based on those alerts within 86. But what I often hear from operators is, I tried it. There were a lot of false positives. My walk-in cooler is defrosting at 2 o'clock in the morning, and now I'm getting woken up and getting the alerts. And so the technology has continued to evolve, and I think there's a lot of movement there. But I think the manufacturers of that equipment still have a way to go to integrate, that data and those alerts. And that's the other challenge in the industry that we've seen is you have different management platforms for different brands of equipment, but that's not very helpful.
I should say we did pilot a smart thermostat system, like a building management system.
Mm-hmm.
It was nice to have the visibility when you got a report that something wasn't working. You could really
Mm-hmm.
see, hey, that unit's not cooling or the unit's not heating. That's great. What didn't work was the comfort settings. Because globally managing comfort settings, you're just never making, nobody's ever happy with it. And there were some background
Mm-hmm.
curtailment things. You can never tell what the thing was doing. So we ended up having to
Got it.
bypass that just because we were saving a little bit, but we were sacrificing fan comfort. And in this industry, you can't have uncomfortable folks in your buildings.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Someone else asked, again, some of these are anonymous, so I can't name names, but Nick, how important is it for you that a vendor is self-performing versus subcontracting to third parties? And then question for me is that something that 86 has noticed makes a difference in overall satisfaction or in the service of the services that are being performed? So I'll let you
In
tackle it.
every case I can get a self-performing vendor, I want a self-performing vendor. We did try a solution earlier in the year, and kind of earlier in the year, we started a neat, clean, and organized initiative, which generated a tremendous amount of service calls, mainly in kind of the handyman, building repair category, refreshing walls, tackling some grout and floor issues, things like that. When we had, a national company dispatching local vendors, we had a lot of inconsistency. Some were great, did great work, but they just were not presentable and should not have been working in front of fans. Um, Others were presentable and the work was completely subpar. I always prefer, even though 86 Repairs is kind of working on our behalf, I like that our operators have the familiarity of who's going to come into the restaurant. They start to recognize the texts that are coming. They start to build that relationship, build that trust. They'll even buy them lunch or something to keep them coming back. So I
Mhm.
think those relationships, basically, especially based on our brand, which is really a relationship based brand, with kind of that working class feel, is very important.
Yeah. You mentioned something really important there that is so often overlooked is just taking care of vendors. And what we've historically seen in the restaurant industry is that you have either through third party software platforms or directly in the way that operators are managing their vendor relationships. They're just beating them up on costs, right? They're trying to drive down hourly rates. And to your point earlier, there are things like trip charges, emergency rates, OT rates, other areas where you can probably negotiate more effectively, but also just taking care of those relationships is really important. Giving the tech a sandwich when they're in the store, right, makes them a lot more likely to put you at the top of their list the next time something really goes wrong. And I think that's something we overlook. Again, operators don't have the buying power they had 5 or 10 years ago with these service companies. So beating them up on hourly rates is not a strategy that helps to reduce cost anymore. You really have to focus on the relationship and on the things that you can control inside your own operation to avoid, using those folks as much as you can. On the question of third party sort of self-perform versus the aggregators or the subcontracting service companies, we share Nick's philosophy. Our customers can use the vendors they want to use, the service companies they want to use who are doing good work for them. We track cost and quality data about service companies, and so we can see who's performing in a given market and who's not. We do tend to see better performance across the board from non-subcontracted service companies. So I think that's a safe generalization. There are exceptions, of course, and sometimes you're in a market where it's hard to get service. You have a national, player who's got availability in those markets. That's sometimes the choice that our customers have to make. But ultimately, we don't get paid by service companies, so we don't make any money from them. We want to recommend whoever's doing good work in those markets. And so customers sometimes are having good experiences with those aggregators or those third parties, and we're fine to use them if the performance is there.
One of the things I hear very frequently when I call is, "Hey, am I working directly for Primanti Brothers, or are you a third party?" And they're always more comfortable once I give them my email address, because there are definitely some vendors out there that don't want to work in that space.
Yep.
And I do, when I introduce 86 repairs, I say, "Hey, you're still working for me. We're paying the bill,
Mm-hmm.
but they're just providing communication, providing dispatching, and helping communicate exactly what's going on in the restaurant."
Yep. Makes sense. All right. Just doing a quick time check. We've got about 5 minutes left here, so we just want to be mindful of time. Let's go to some other questions since folks have some other questions. Um, what factors are resulting in your biggest R&M cost savings? So where do you see kind of the biggest opportunities if you had to pick one thing to focus on?
Um, Implementing preventative maintenance. When I started here, we really did not have, we had a very scattered PM schedule. So we were doing a great job with ice machines, but we weren't doing so well with some of our cold side. So if you look at our trends, cold side is our highest repair. I think the industry, it's hot side, right, Daniel? It's kind of that realm.
Yeah, depends on the month, but yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. So one of the things we saw, and like I said, we're fryer centric. We have a lot of grease in our kitchens. That means that the coils on our refrigeration are getting very impacted with grease, with dust, with all of that. So what we started doing is working with our vendors and saying, "Hey, when you're working on our ice machine, we want you to go through the cook line and clean all of the coils and make sure all of that equipment is in good repair." And that's really where we've started to see, we've got a little bit of proactive costs that we added in, but we're seeing those reactive after hours, weekend emergencies really get reduced. Um, we are doing it quarterly in the kitchen, quarterly on the ice machines. Out at the bar where there's less grease, we're only doing it once a year. So I think it's really being deliberate with where you're spending those PM proactive dollars. One of the other things I think we talked about was kind of plumbing being so high in the industry. And you get your grease traps pumped, right? It's a compliance thing. You always do it. One of the things that we're seeing is the grease traps protect the sewer downstream as your sewage is going out to the city, the municipality, wherever it goes. The problem is that line between the grease trap and your building is not protected. So that's still getting impacted with grease. So we pump our grease traps quarterly. Once a year, we have the same company bring a high pressure jetter and jet from the grease trap back to the building. And we find that that really keeps our main lines clear. We have less main line backups. We still have branch lines and things because of paper towels in a toilet or something like that. But really keeping that main line open keeps the building going.
Great insight. PM, I think, is an overlooked savings opportunity because you have to spend the money to see the savings, and that is really difficult oftentimes with the tight cash situation that a lot of restaurant operators are in. Great insight. All right, we've got 2 minutes left. We have a couple of questions here that are specific to 86 and how we work. We did not want this to be an advertisement for 86, wanted to get some good insights out, but I will answer a couple of those at the end here. One more fun one for you, Nick. What is your favorite sandwich?
Capicola and cheese.
Capicola and cheese. All right.
Capicola and cheese in the morning when I have an early morning flight at the Pittsburgh airport, I'll add an egg.
All right. You heard it here first. There's the recommendation. A couple of folks asked about cost and sort of how much 86 costs and how we make money because we don't make money from service companies. How does it work? Basically, the cost for 86 to help manage this process with staff is really about the size of the restaurant. So we charge a flat subscription fee monthly to each location based on what we expect the service volume to be. So really big restaurants with a lot of equipment pay more because we're also saving them a lot more money. We have troubleshooting. You saw some of the numbers around dispatch avoidance, avoiding unnecessary truck rolls, whether it's an internal team or an outside service company, starts adding up real quick. So really, we focus our pricing based on ROI, where we can see the most ROI. So that's just a little bit about the model. Sydney, if you can put up the email address as well. If folks have questions or you want to talk more about any of the topics that we discussed today, you can feel free to email us hello@86repairs.com. We're happy to answer other questions if you didn't get to ask those or have them answered in the session, or if you want to talk to somebody on our team, happy to share more. Another question, what is the vetting procedure like for vendors when 86 is suggesting a specific service company if there's not a customer preferred service company? So we manage this first in our onboarding process. If there's a service company that the customer has a gap, let's say we need a plumber in a given market, don't have one that we like, 86 will recommend service companies based on cost and quality data that we're tracking. We vet those vendors first and foremost. The gold standard is how well are they doing in other customers. So we have thousands of customers around the country, thousands of service companies that we've worked with. So we have some good insight there. So we use that data to help vet the performance of those companies and make recommendations. And then in some cases, it's rare, but occasionally we'll have a rural market where we haven't worked with anybody yet. It's a new market for us. We'll track that performance of those service companies over time. And then as part of our business reviews with customers, we'll be able to give you some insight about how those companies are performing and where you might be able to make changes to reduce cost or improve responsiveness. Hope that's helpful. I'm going to end it there. We're just 1 minute over. Really appreciate everyone joining. Nick, thanks a lot for your time. We will send a copy and a link to the recording out to everyone who registered, and you'll have access to a video of this conversation. And if there's anything we can do to be helpful, please feel free to reach out.